Welcome back to Legacy Contracts, and if this is your first time here, we're glad you found us. This channel exists for attorneys who sense that something beneath the surface of their firm isn't quite working, even if it's hard to name. Here, we look beyond surface-level efficiency and into the invisible systems shaping how your firm operates, serves clients, and sustains growth. Through practical insight and honest conversation, we help bring clarity to what's often overlooked, so you can lead with intention, not assumption. If you're interested in building a law firm that's not just functional but thoughtfully designed, you're in the right place. Let's begin. If every important decision in your law firm eventually makes its way back to the managing partner, you may not have a delegation problem. You may have a decision pathway problem. This distinction matters, because when managing partners feel overloaded, the instinct is often to ask, "Who can I delegate this to?" Or, "Do we need to hire someone else?" But delegation only works when there is somewhere for the decision to go. If your firm hasn't intentionally established who owns a decision, what authority they have, when they should consult someone else, and when leadership actually needs to become involved, delegation becomes another layer of uncertainty. And uncertainty has a predictable destination. It moves upward. At Legacy Contracts, we work with law firms to identify the operational structures that determine how work, responsibility, and decisions actually move through the organization. One of the most important of those structures is the decision pathway. Today, we're looking at how law firms can intentionally design decision pathways that reduce unnecessary escalation, strengthen delegation, and stop the managing partner from becoming the default destination for every question. Section 1. What is a decision pathway? A decision pathway is simply the defined route a decision takes from the moment an issue arises to the point where it is resolved. That sounds straightforward. But inside many law firms, that pathway exists almost entirely through experience. Someone encounters a problem. They aren't sure who owns it, so they ask a colleague. That person isn't sure either, so the question moves to a supervisor. The supervisor isn't comfortable making the final decision, so it reaches the managing partner. Eventually, the managing partner provides an answer. The issue is resolved, but the firm hasn't necessarily solved the underlying problem. It has simply completed the pathway that already exists. And if that same pattern happens repeatedly, the organization learns something. When something is unclear, take it to leadership. That is a decision pathway. The problem is that it wasn't designed. It evolved. And when pathways evolve without being examined, managing partners often become the default decision point without ever intentionally choosing to become one. Section 2. Why delegation doesn't always remove leadership from the process. Delegation is often presented as the answer to managing partner overload. And delegation is important, but assigning a task to someone isn't the same thing as transferring a decision. This is where many firms get stuck. A managing partner might say, "I've delegated that responsibility," but the employee continues coming back with questions. "Can I approve this? Should I make this exception? What should I do if the client doesn't respond? Should we change the process? Can I authorize this expense?" The employee technically owns the task, but leadership still owns the uncertainty surrounding the task. That means the decision hasn't actually moved. Only the work has. This is why effective delegation requires more than assigning responsibility. It requires defining the decision pathway around the responsibility. What can this person decide independently? What requires consultation? What requires approval? What happens when the situation falls outside the normal process? And who becomes the next point of escalation? Without those answers, employees may continue seeking confirmation even when they have technically been given the responsibility. Section 3. Start with the decisions that keep coming back. If you want to begin designing better decision pathways, don't start by trying to document every decision your firm could make. Start with the decisions that are already creating friction. Look for the questions that repeatedly come back to leadership. the approvals that seem to happen over and over, the exceptions that only one person knows how to handle, the processes where employees consistently ask, "What should I do?" Those are signals. They're showing you where the existing pathway is unclear. For example, imagine a staff member needs to resolve a client communication issue. There may be a general policy for client communication. But what happens when the situation doesn't fit the policy? Does the staff member know who to consult? Can they make the decision themselves? Does it go to a supervisor? Does it go directly to an attorney? Does it require the managing partner? If the answer is always, "It depends," that's worth examining. Because "it depends" may be appropriate for the individual situation. But the organization should still have a clear pathway for determining who decides what happens next. Section 4. Build the pathway around authority. One of the most important elements of a decision pathway is authority. Responsibility without authority creates dependency. If someone is responsible for managing a process but cannot make the decisions necessary to move that process forward, they will naturally escalate, and that creates unnecessary upward movement. A stronger pathway establishes different levels of decision-making. For example, Level 1. The employee can resolve the issue independently within established guidelines. Level 2. The employee consults with a designated supervisor or owner of the process. Level 3. The issue requires leadership or attorney involvement because it exceeds the established authority. The exact levels will look different from firm to firm. The point isn't to create a rigid hierarchy for every decision. The point is to make the boundaries visible. Your team should know not only what they are responsible for, but also what they are authorized to decide. That distinction can dramatically change how work moves through a firm. Section 5. Create an escalation path. The next piece is escalation. A healthy firm doesn't eliminate escalation. It designs it. There will always be situations that require additional judgment. There will always be exceptions. There will always be decisions that belong with attorneys or leadership. The goal isn't to prevent those decisions from reaching the managing partner. The goal is to make sure they reach the right person for the right reason. A useful escalation pathway might answer 4 questions. What triggers escalation? Who receives it first? What information should accompany the escalation? When does it move to the next level? This is important because an escalation should not simply be, "I don't know what to do, so I'm sending this to you." A better pathway might be, "Here's the issue. Here's what we've already reviewed. Here's the decision point. Here's what falls within our existing process, and here's the part that requires leadership direction." Now leadership isn't being asked to reconstruct the entire problem. They're being asked to make the decision that actually belongs with them. That is a very different operational experience. Section 6. Design pathways that only work when one person is present. There's another important consideration. Decision pathways should survive the absence of the person who normally handles them. If an employee takes vacation and nobody knows what happens to their decisions, the pathway isn't actually institutionalized. If a manager leaves and everyone suddenly asks, "Who handles this now?" the firm has discovered that the pathway lived inside the individual rather than inside the organization. This is why decision pathways should be documented alongside the information people need to use them, not necessarily in a massive manual. Sometimes a simple decision guide, workflow, responsibility map, or escalation procedure is enough. The goal is accessibility. The organization should be able to answer, "Who owns this? What can they decide? What information do they need? When does it escalate? Where does it go next?" That is what begins turning an informal pathway into an intentional one. Section 7. The goal isn't to remove the managing partner. It's important to clarify something. The goal isn't to remove the managing partner from decision-making. Managing partners should absolutely be involved in decisions that require their judgment, authority, experience, or strategic direction. The goal is to remove the managing partner as the default destination for uncertainty. Those are very different things. A managing partner's time should be spent on the decisions where their involvement creates the greatest value, not on answering questions that could have been resolved elsewhere if the pathway had been clear, not on approving routine exceptions because nobody knows who else has authority, not on repeatedly explaining the same process because the knowledge was never built into the system. The goal isn't less leadership. It's better directed leadership. Every law firm has decision pathways. Some are intentional. Others were created through years of repeated questions, approvals, exceptions, workarounds, and habits. And if your managing partner is consistently carrying decisions that should belong elsewhere, the answer may not be to simply delegate more. It may be time to examine the pathway itself. Ask, where does this decision currently go? Who owns it? What authority do they have? What requires escalation? And does everyone involved understand what happens when something falls outside the normal process? Because when decision pathways are clear, delegation becomes more effective. When delegation becomes more effective, fewer decisions need to move upward. And when fewer unnecessary decisions reach leadership, managing partners regain capacity for the work only they can do. At Legacy Contracts, we believe sustainable law firm growth isn't simply about adding people or working harder. It's about intentionally designing the operational structures that allow the people already inside the firm to work with greater clarity and confidence. If your firm feels like too many decisions still depend on the managing partner, we invite you to start by examining the pathway, not just the person, because the goal isn't to make your managing partner less involved. It's to make sure they're involved where they matter most. For additional resources on law firm operations, delegation, decision ownership, and building a firm that operates with greater clarity, visit Legacy Contracts and explore our resources for law firm leaders. Thanks for watching. We hope today's insight helped bring clarity to something that may have been operating quietly in the background of your firm. Progress doesn't always start with doing more. It often starts with seeing more clearly. Law firms aren't built overnight. They're shaped by the decisions you make once the invisible becomes visible. This is Legacy Contracts, and until next time, keep leading with clarity.